Hi, everyone. This is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of the Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, or as we call it, just CSA. CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit workforce development association dedicated to helping grow, support, and sustain the professionals charged with the cybersecurity of control systems. We're specifically talking about those systems that have pumps and valves and actuators, real cyber to physical moving parts, and control nearly every aspect of our modern connected industries. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. It is my hope you find it inspirational or motivating or revealing or informative, and perhaps at times even a little entertaining. Take care and be well.
So, with no further ado, I am extremely excited and very, very grateful to Administrator Pekoske to join us today and give us sort of the closeout keynote. We had the luxury of John Pistol, his predecessor, kicking us off, and David, you're going to take us home. Thank you so much, and thank you for what you do. I know you've had many, many years in service with Coast Guard and DHS in different roles, and now finally at the TSA. Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Derek. I appreciate the intro, and glad you had John to lead you off. I mean, for your audience, John Pistol, when he was TSA administrator, he created the pre-check program, which I'm going to guess many of you participate in. Huge benefit to travelers that represent lower risk compared to other travelers overall. But I'm sure, as John mentioned to you when he led off, that a surprise to many people in the country is that TSA does security for things beyond the aviation system. And even the aviation system, if you think about, I think what most people will associate us with would be the passenger screening process that we conduct. Not so much the federal air marshals that we have in flight, the screening we do of checked baggage, and also the work we do on air cargo security. Air cargo is handled sometimes in a very different way than cargo on a passenger aircraft. Additionally, we have in our remit of authorities, and you got to kind of remember back to 2001 history, if you can, that TSA was created in the Department of Transportation. So essentially what happened right after 9/11 is the administration at the time, the Bush administration, knew they wanted to create an agency to be able to ensure that attacks on our transportation system, not necessarily just like 9/11, but a terrorist attack on our transportation system didn't happen again. So what they did in the Department of Transportation is they looked across all of what are called the modes. So a mode would be rail, a mode would be aviation, it would also be pipelines. And they said, hey, let's just take all the modes, look at the security responsibilities that they currently have and that what we think they should have given 9/11, and let's create a new agency and just move all that responsibility over to this new agency. So particularly now, given that it takes us quite a long time to pass legislation or to go through a rulemaking process. Back then, you're trying to ensure that a crisis that impacted and directly killed in one day 2,977 people, that doesn't happen again, and you want to quickly stand up the ability to prevent it from occurring. So Congress passed a law that established us in 69 days. So 69 days from 9/11 in November, law was passed, and the next day the president signed that legislation at Reagan Airport here in the Washington, D.C. area. And what that does is it gives us pretty extensive authorities to be able to act quickly and to be able to act decisively if we anticipate a threat materializing to the transportation system overall, whether it's an airport, an airline, a pipeline system, a rail system, a mass transit system. All those things are covered by our authorities. And the reason I give you that prelude is because it's kind of important to understand what we have done recently with respect to cybersecurity, because the authorities we have is just to ensure the systems are secure. It doesn't prescribe that it's only for physical security. And so what we did over the past 2 years, and I think when people think about this 5 years from now, it's going to be pretty remarkable what not just we as an agency, but what the owners and operators of critical systems within the transportation sector have done over the past 2-year period of time to make sure that two things happen, that their transportation system, again, whether it's an airport, an airline, a pipeline, or a rail system, that their transportation system is as secure as they can make it against a cyber attack. In other words, they do whatever we can do to protect the systems from attack, make them a much less attractive target, and make them much more hard to be successful in executing an attack. But the second piece, and the part that I think sometimes is not fully considered in the approach that TSA has taken and the approach that other agencies that have existing authority have already taken, or if they don't have the existing authority, once they get it, will take. And that's to ensure that the critical infrastructure that we're endeavoring to protect also becomes more resilient. What I mean by that is the ability to continue to provide the services that the public relies on, or that our military relies on, in a quick way after a success, after an attack, if the attack is successful. And you have to assume that that a series of attacks, you have to plan to the fact that they will be successful to some degree potentially, because you have to have a plan if that's the case for how to respond. And so we've been working first with the pipeline sector, and then with the rail sector, and now with the aviation sector, to build up those cybersecurity protections and to help build the cybersecurity resilience, so that an attack, if successful, its physical manifestation is brought under control rather quickly, and the services are able to resume to the public that depends on them, or the other entities that depend on them. So what we have done, really mostly for the past year plus, is approach this from a performance-based perspective, which in the federal government is not a common approach. It's a relatively new approach. It's one that makes, to me, particularly for cyber, an awful lot of sense. And basically what that stands for is, rather than a regulatory agency like us going out and saying to a pipeline company or to an airport, hey, you have to do these certain activities. They need to be done by this particular date, and you need to continue to perform those activities until we relax the requirement. That's kind of the old way in many cases of regulating, is you just put out a specific level, specific number of activities that need to be performed. You inspect against what you observe and what's been recorded as far as how well the owner or operator is performing those activities. In cyber, in our experience, and certainly in the industry's perspective, and the feedback we received from them was, hey, that's not a good model to use. Let's go to more of a performance-based model. And so essentially what we did was we pivoted from our initial requirements within a year to a performance-based framework, wherein we said to the owners and operators, hey, here are 4 key outcomes that you need to achieve. You come back to us within a certain period of time, and you tell us within your business model and within the technology that you either have currently employed or will employ, given the changing threat dynamic, how you're going to achieve the outcomes that we've established. For example, one of the outcomes was, how do you achieve network segmentation? Another one would be, how do you achieve access control over your critical cybersecurity systems? Or another one would be, how do you ensure that you patch your systems in a prioritized way? Because if you look at some of these major pieces of critical infrastructure in the country, there are literally thousands of patches that tend to be implemented, and it's not reasonable to say implement every patch within 30 days of receipt. It's just not either physically possible, or does it make a lot of sense, because you would be taking that activity away from something else. And so those were 3 of the outcomes. The other outcome was to ensure that you had a process where you can continuously monitor your performance. So what happened was these owners and operators put together those cybersecurity implementation plans, sent them to us for review, and then we reviewed them along with the FBI, along with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, along with the Department of Transportation mode that had responsibility for the safety side for these companies. So in the case of rail systems, for example, it would be the Federal Railway Administration, or in aviation would be the Federal Aviation Administration. And in the case of pipes, it would be the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration and the Department of Energy. So we kind of worked all together as a federal family, reviewed those plans, made some adjustments to them, went back to the owners and operators, had them make some adjustments to them, and then finally approved them. The stage we're in now is to assess objectively how well each one of these owners and operators are doing in kind of 2 dimensions. The first dimension would be, how well are you executing your own plan that we approved? In other words, that's a sort of like a traditional regulatory approach, where you look at activities, and then you assess how well the activities are being performed. But the nuance is that it's not a cookie cutter set of activities. It's not a set of activities that the company proposed that we, the federal government, approved. The second part, and a really, really important part as well, is how do you assess how well the outcome is being achieved? It's one thing to say, hey, we can certify that all the activities that are in the plan are being performed and they're being performed satisfactorily, but that doesn't really answer the question of, one of the outcomes was ensure network segmentation. How do we assess that they're assuring network segmentation? So we're at that phase now with pipelines, we'll be soon with rail systems, and then after that with airlines and airports, to really go back and do some of the hard intellectual work that's involved in really determining levels of outcome achievement and the level of outcome achievement that we think we need given the threat that we face. A couple of things that are important to understand with this. One is that one, from an adversarial perspective, you're not giving an adversary sort of a one-size-fits-all set of requirements that once they had that set of requirements, they would know exactly what every single owner and operator within your system was doing. So it would make the attack surface a little bit more attractive to them if they had that master key, if you will. In the system we have now, each individual company has a different set of activities they perform. It's really based on their business model. It's based on the threats that they see that they're facing as it fits in with the national threat level. So one, it makes it harder for an adversary. Secondly, cyber is going to change very rapidly over the course of the next several years. And so we wanted to make sure that we future-proofed the regulations that we put out and that the companies had the flexibility if they saw a better way that might technologically not be feasible now to provide for network segmentation, that they had the option of adopting a different technology and kind of growing as the technology grew. The third is, the adversary's capabilities are going to change. Adversary behavior might become better known and better understood, and that would factor into the activities you perform as well. Additionally, this particular model allows us, and we've done this already, primarily with pipelines and rail, soon to be with aviation, because they came out in different times, so we have more time working with the pipeline sector than the others. Is hey, looking at what other companies have done, here are some what we would term best practices or common approaches for other companies to consider. And we don't identify or attribute who's doing what, but we do say, hey, we've seen these particular practices. For example, in ensuring access control. Obviously, multi-factor authentication is going to be one method that many use and pretty common across the sector. And just say, hey, but in addition to multi-factor authentication, we've seen these other methods being used or these other activities being implemented to ensure that there's access control of systems. So it's been a good two-way level of dialogue. The other thing that is important to kind of frame this is we decided collectively amongst the federal partners and with a lot of conversations with the industry as well, we decided that we weren't going to regulate every single owner and operator. And the reason is that in the pipeline sector, for example, there's over 3,000 pipelines in the United States. We don't have the capacity to inspect and to monitor the performance of 3,000 companies at startup, given our current staffing levels. Additionally, we really wanted to look at which particular owners and operators were systemically critical to the smooth operating of that entire system. So we chose to regulate a much smaller set than the overall 3,000. For example, for pipelines, we're under 100 companies, which makes sense to us, makes sense to the industry, because we're focusing on the ones that if they go down, then large swaths of the American consumer will be affected by that. The other thing that we required was to do some reporting so that we have a good sense of what kinds of things are going on in the cybersecurity world that affect the smooth operation of critical cyber systems. And we share that reporting commonly across the federal government partners, so we're all seeing the same information at the same time. We also required tabletop exercises to be done. Again, it gets to that resiliency piece. So, a cyber attack in many cases is going to result in a physical manifestation of some sort. To ensure resiliency and to ensure public confidence, let's test how a company is going to respond. And we've done some, individual company to federal government agency tabletop exercises that have been really very informative for both of us. What the owners and operators of the system saw was that the federal government partners are all kind of at the same table and they're talking to each other, and that's very reassuring to them. And secondly, that, hey, there's different ways that you're going to get information on an attacking process. Many ways nowadays are going to involve any one of the social media platforms that are out there. That's oftentimes going to be your first alert that something's going on. And how do we get in front of the issue with the public and reassure the public that, one, we know what's going on, and the we is the owners and operators of the system that's being impacted, and the federal government agencies and the state agencies that have responsibility for those systems from a safety and security perspective. And so, how do we get in front of the media early, try to establish public confidence that we are all working together, and we have a plan in place that we're going to use and we're going to execute on to get these systems back up and operating as quickly as we can, and try to be as transparent as we can with the public as well, so that people don't assume things that are not based largely in fact. So that's kind of where we've been with cybersecurity. Like I said, really critical phase. Kind of in my view, one of the most exciting phases of what we're doing now is to try to prove the level of outcome achievement. And it can't be, hey, just because you did these 15 different activities for access control that you now have achieved the outcome. It's going to be through some testing, through some exercises to see, hey, if you've achieved the outcome, but you can't recover quickly, and that's going to have an impact on our overall assessment as well. The last thing I'd say before I open it up to questions from all of you, because I want to leave 10 or 15 minutes for you to ask me questions, is I would give an enormous amount of credit to the owners and operators of these systems in two dimensions. One is that they have been great partners with us, and partner in a really positive way. And when I say partner, I don't mean that we're diffusing responsibility for actions. What I mean is that we have good communications, we have good understanding, we have relationships where we trust each other in things that we say and things that we do. And the other dimension is our ability to communicate to the public consistently what's going on has been greatly enhanced. I mean, you don't see a gas pipeline owner operator now saying in a public venue, I get no support out of the U.S. federal government, or I completely disagree with what the U.S. federal government or my state governments are doing to help us make sure that our systems are protected and that we can respond if we're successfully attacked. So, I think we've achieved a decent level of success over a relatively short period of time. But it kind of goes back to where I started, is that we had the advantage in TSA of having existing legal authority for doing the things that we did, and we also had existing relationships with these companies. So it wasn't us knocking at the door for the first time ever. But the relationships now are much more robust because we've literally been in the trenches together to try to make sure that these systems are as cyber secure as we can make them. So with that, let me pause, and I'll open it up to any questions or any comments anybody would like to make.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, sir. Let me see. We do have some questions coming in. I mean, the first one, or one that I picked out of the list, is about AI. It's the buzzword of the day, obviously, but it's more than a buzzword. There's a lot of transformational things that are happening and are going to happen. So this question specifically was, is the TSA doing anything to prepare for social engineering techniques, phishing, smishing, phishing, afforded or made easier and cheaper by AI?
Yeah, of course we are, and we're doing it independently to a degree, but also with the entire Department of Homeland Security and really the entire executive branch. A lot of partnership with Congress. There's been a ton of work done on this. In addition to what was posed in the question, we use artificial intelligence in some of our own security solutions, and so making sure that we are fully aware at the very senior levels. What are we relying on, and how were things built, and how are we assessing as some of these algorithms learn? How are we assuring ourselves that they're learning in the right manner. And additionally, how are we making sure, hey, as an organization that regulates cybersecurity within the transportation sector, we need to set the example and make sure that we don't become a victim successful of a cyber attack, or if so, that we are able to mitigate it rather quickly. And we've got some very sensitive systems, as you can imagine, and we will have people inspect us, and we will have some incidents where we know we need to make some improvements, but it's important that we make those improvements as quickly as we can, and we be reasonably transparent with the solution process when it occurs. I mean, I don't think you want to advertise to an adversary where you have all your vulnerabilities, but what you do want to convey to them is that, hey, I'm checking my system all the time, and I'm working in a zero trust environment increasingly, and our systems we're basically practicing what we preach. And the other thing too that is something that I think about a lot. I'm not trained in computer science from an academic background, but I've worked with cyber issues for a good number of years. And one of the things that we saw initially was that when you approached either a senior government colleague, a member of the senior executive service, or a political appointee running an agency like me, or you approached some senior people in state government or in companies, oftentimes that CEO level person or that director level person would defer discussion on all cyber issues to their CIO or their CISO. It's basically, hey, this is not something that, you're talking to the wrong person, essentially, is what some people would say. You need to talk to so-and-so. But really, the time is long past that senior executives can afford to do that. I mean, you've got to know, if you're running an agency like this, I know all about how we do screening operations, both passenger and cargo. I know all about how we're doing physical security work with everybody in the transportation sector. I need to also be conversant in what we're doing to protect our systems from a cyber attack, and to make the work that we do in this agency, which is very sensitive, as cyber secure as we can make it.
I just, as you're talking, I'm thinking about all the disparate systems. We had the panel we did as part of the series on aviation. We touched on all these different verticals, but just on aviation, they talked about how many different third parties and all the systems and all the interrelations having to do just with a modern airport, which is like a small city. It's a lot, and I think there's a number of questions coming in about segmentation that comes up in all our surveys everywhere. Obviously, segmenting out and de-risking all your network, maybe only portions of it, but it's easier said than done, especially in some environments. So people are curious about that. What is the process for assessing implementation of network segmentation? Could there be fines for people who don't do it? Is there overly concerns about negatively impacting operations by doing segmentation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly in any regulatory regime, there are a couple of key items that really compel people to comply. One is we all have the ability to assess fines, and the fines can be very progressive, and they can occur rather quickly if there's a critical flaw that is just not being addressed in a way that we think is a responsible way to address it. And that wouldn't be necessarily an independent decision that TSA would make. We would make it with the FBI, we'd make it with CISA, we'd make it with our safety partners as well, because a lot of things that you do on the security side have a safety impact, and vice versa. So you need to make sure that you're making the right choices, but you need to act quickly. The other thing is that many of these are publicly traded companies. They will have disclosures they need to make to the Securities and Exchange Commission on actions that we might be taking with respect to their viability to provide their services in a cyber secure manner. So there's a lot there. Plus, we're public agencies. We have the ability to not publicly shame a company necessarily. That would be very rare, but it would be to use the public podium that we have to highlight where there are vulnerabilities and really try to put some public pressure on companies in a particular sector to make sure that they've provided for and they've been responsive to some of those needs. And the other thing for the United States, unique, I think, amongst other nations in the world, is we have the best intelligence system in the world. And so we're going to have a good level of warning in many cases, but not all. You can't depend on it. And one of the things that we did very early on, and we've continued to do this over the course of the last 2 years, is we provided high-level security access to owners and operators of these systems. After they, of course, go through a background check and everything else that's you would expect us to do, but really let them see some very highly sensitive classified information so that they can better understand. It's one thing to understand an adversary's capability. That's only part of the equation. You also have to understand the adversary's intent and some indicators that you might get of future adversary behavior. And you can get that when you share some very sensitive information. And really, it's important for us to do that because we're asking CEOs to make fairly significant resource reallocation decisions. Cybersecurity is a cost, not necessarily a profit center. And so, I think it's only fair that where appropriate, we give them as much information as we possibly can so they can frame their approach going forward.
This question of not just about TSA, but government regulations, its role, and there's those that are against it and those that are for it. But what I sense, and I mean, it should just, if you confirm this is it's your opinion or similar to yours, what I sense from people who are trying to look at the weighting and balancing of all this is it's got a pretty vital role to play. Meaning nobody really advocates for, I wish the government would just come down on everybody, but they say some people won't take the reallocation steps, as to use your term, they won't take it until they're, I hate to say it, forced to do it. I'm in the middle. Some regulations can be bad, or the way they're implemented can be bad. Again, not saying specific TSA, but we see other verticals have had, some regulatory pressures put on them within the cybersecurity area, and you see the sort of these, compliance games and things like that start to get spawned. But without the behavior, some people might not take the action at all.
Yeah, but hey, at the end of the day, you really want to incentivize good behavior, right? And you also want to protect everybody else. So if you're running a pipeline and you're one of the critical operators, you likely rely on other critical operators as well to make sure that your service gets to the ultimate end customer. And so there's definitely we can't let one entity be so much of an outlier that it affects the rest of the system's performance. And I'll take it a step further is, we have 16 critical infrastructure sectors in the United States. One of the most challenging things to do is to look across all the sectors and say, hey, if you're in the transportation sector, what are you relying in all your plans from an adjacent sector? And are you sure that they can provide it? And you can't go 100% because nothing's 100% in this world. You have to say, hey, if what I'm relying on from the, let's say, energy sector would be a good one. If what I'm relying for on the energy sector ends up not being available to me, what do I do? How do I respond to that? And so that's a big part of where we're all collectively going. And that's a central role for CISA. When you break down CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they're both big responsibilities. And CISA's key responsibility on the infrastructure security side is to look at those cross-sector dependencies that are there, identify them, and their key role on the cyber side is to be a resource for private sector entities and government agencies that are having a cyber problem that just want help or they're seeing certain things going on in their networks and I'm not sure whether that's a big problem or not. To be able to turn to CISA and see if they can get some advice and some guidelines. The other agency that's really important here is NIST, the National Institute for the Standards of Technology. And NIST does exactly what the title describes. And given that cyber is going to be constantly changing, but hey, that's not to say that other areas of security operations aren't constantly changing too. But cyber probably more so, more accelerated than the others. But to make sure we stay current and don't have to reissue a different regulation every time is if you attach yourself to NIST frameworks for performance or NIST standards, as we learn as a country, NIST updates those standards, which means that all the regulations update at the same time, and it is a common framework that people can use going forward. CISA has cybersecurity planning guidelines, and they are very consistent with what NIST provides. And the other entity to mention that I haven't that's very important in this is the National Cyber Director and staff. And as you know, we have a national cyber strategy. If you read through that strategy, many of the things I talked about are things that we're executing on that strategy, but we were executing on them before the strategy was put in place. Not much before, but before it was fully put in place. And so we were a little bit of a, hey, how does this work? Can it work? Certainly in the transportation sector as an example.
You have time for a couple more questions?
Sure do. Go ahead.
Okay. More have come in. I don't think we'll get to all these, but I'll try to pick some out. This is interesting talking about auditors. Obviously, there's some people who have experience with NERC, SIP, and auditing going on for many years there. Can you speak to a requirement for annual reassessment and auditing by TSA auditors? And will they be looking for new TSA security directive versions that are coming up like C and D?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And part of, when owners and operators submit their plans, so hey, here's my plan for increasing the level of protection I'm providing for my systems, and then, hey, is that level the right level? In other words, what level of outcome achievement am I achieving? We approve those plans. The other part is that the company has to submit an assessment program, and we approve that assessment program, and then we require them to assess a certain percentage every single year. So we have a fairly tight cycle where we'll see everything reassessed. That's really important to be able to get a good sense. If you see that, if we become aware either from company reporting or from intelligence information that, hey, there's a particular attack vector that's now becoming a likely attack vector to a piece of critical infrastructure in the country, we can get a very quick assessment with those assessment plans as to how ready the rail sector is, for example, in being able to protect themselves from that particular threat, or if attacked, the resiliency piece. But the resiliency piece kind of applies more across the board. But it's just a super good tool to give you a quick assessment of, hey, where do I need to do immediate quick work? Other thing that's related to this I should mention is, it's taken some time to develop the level of protection we currently have in the transportation sector. You can't just wish this happens overnight and then all of a sudden it's in place. We don't have a lot of time because we've got nation state actors that are very concerning to us, and we need to make sure that we do everything we can in a very, very short time window to be able to make sure that our systems are better protected, that we get very quick notification if something is starting to occur, and that we have those plans that I talked about for getting services back up and running, well tested in that event. So, it takes a number of years to get things in place to a level that you're going to say, okay, there's a noticeable difference here now, and time is not on our side in that regard.
Yeah, you're under the same constraints of any software project I've ever been involved in. I remember 25 years ago, my first software project, somebody said you can have it better, faster, or cheaper. You can't have all three.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So you sort of touched on this already. It's sort of like punitive is not as good as, something more positive, right? And this question was about interfacing with CISA and talking about Jen Easterly's sort of transformation initiatives, redirecting government and private relations into collaboration rather than a confrontational dynamic.
Right.
Is that sort of what's your view on that? Is that something that TSA is in line with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, first off, CISA has been an incredible partner with us, and CISA has expertise that we don't have. We have expertise that CISA doesn't have. I mean, we're more in the weeds in expertise in the transportation sector, as is any other sector risk management agency. And so I think there's a really good dynamic setting up and operating to support basically the smooth functioning of critical infrastructure in the country. And CISA does provide that. It's called JCDC, Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, where companies can raise concerns, and they don't have to worry so much about raising it to a regulator sometimes because they just don't know enough at that point. But what we're trying to work our way through is, at what point does the regulatory agency need to get involved? And I think this is also a cultural thing to a degree on the part of the regulators. Hey, what kind of relationship do you have with the entities that you regulate? I mean, oftentimes people think of it as adversarial, and it doesn't need to be, and shouldn't be, really, right? There should be, the regulated parties have a definite interest in making sure that there's a level playing field out there, and that their business performance is not affected by the poor performance of a business they rely on. It's not investing, doesn't have the costs that they have, just to make sure that things are fair across the economy to the extent you can do that. And so finding a way to have a relationship as a regulator with your regulated parties that there are going to be times when you're assessing a fine. That's not necessarily something that a company jumps up and down and says thank you for, right? But I'll speak for TSA. We don't assess a fine until we're sure that you're just basically ignoring what we want to do. I mean, we really try to work with the owners and operators of the systems that we oversee. The other thing too is that I'll take pipelines, for example. I think it's really important that if you're the regulator, you need to understand, not in super great detail because you just can't, but you need to understand at a basic level how this system works and what are the concerns of the operators in the system. One of the only ways you're going to be able to get that is to get out in the field and actually see how things are running. I spend a good amount of time with oil and gas pipeline companies in different parts of the country, just going and visit and spend a day and saying, hey, kind of walk me through how your business operates, how a well operates, how the compressors operates, the refining end of it to clean up the gas, the transmission piece, just so that as the regulator, you're, when they see you do things, they know that you have a certain, at least basic understanding of the operating environment that they're trying to work in, and really importantly that, and I feel that we've achieved this in the companies that we regulate, because I've ensured that, hey, if the CEO of the company wants to call me on something, here's my cell number. Give me a call because I think it's important. I'm being paid by the taxpayer to do my job, and I think that they ought to be able to, with a significant concern, reach directly out to me and say, hey, I'm really concerned about this. I need you guys to either do this or do that, and we'll have that conversation. But rather than and just be at loggerheads, and I don't think we're at that stage at all with any of the the hundreds and hundreds of companies that we regulate.
I loved your sort of paraphrasing it. The stick is in the bag. We don't really want to take it out. If we have to, okay, we will. But otherwise, there's a whole bunch of other things we can be doing here.
Right. Yeah, and really to a degree, the other thing to think about is oftentimes I'll be asked a question about, and these are mostly on the aviation side, but just given the size of our aviation system, from another government partner, hey, how do you think this would operate? If we did X, how would it be operationalized within that industry sector? And I think to be you have to have a dual role. You have to be an advocate for the industry that you regulate, and you have to be a person who ensures that at the end of the day that there's compliance with the baseline requirements they have in place. You can't do just solely one or the other. And there are a good number of conversations where, hey, it's still very formative, but it's just an initial gut. Hey, how does this work in this industry? And so you want to be knowledgeable to the point that you're given good advice, but also know your limitations too, right? And just say, hey, from what I know, this is all I can really offer to you, but I can find out more if you want me to get more detailed information. But sometimes it's just a real quick, hey, we're thinking about something, just give us a read on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Two questions, and there's a bunch we're not going to get to, but I have two maybe I've selected out. One's about insider threat. So we do an annual survey, and the winner, the threat actors, nation states were down here, hacktivists were down here, all real, percentage requirement, but the insider threat was huge. It was the winner. What do you guys feel about that? You obviously have so many people inside your department, but then, like you keep pointing out, all these lines to people outside the department, but they have direct lines into things. Where do you guys rank in insider threat?
Oh, it's really high, and it's not just high, but it's getting more concerning. We do a number of things. I mean, you can do insider threat mitigation just based on information, right? And you don't have to do anything physical with a person, like screening, for example, in some cases. But in some cases, and TSA uses this a lot in our entire system, is the expectation of being screened is oftentimes a sufficient enough deterrent that you will deter a good portion of the behavior that you're concerned about. And so, we use random screening protocols in airports, for example, in cargo screening facilities, for example, specifically directed at the insider threat. The other piece of this is to make sure that it's kind of an interesting challenge to make sure that you're alert to the indicators that you may have an insider threat issue developing. I mean, the threat is always there, but is it developing in a company? The other part of this is some of the best information you're going to get on insiders are from insiders. And so you really have to create the framework where a coworker, if they're seeing something that just doesn't sit right with them, that they feel that they can come to any organization that has oversight, like a police officer, a security organization in an airport, us, Customs and Border Protection in an airport, and just report something that concerns them and know that we're going to handle the information responsibly, which means two things. One is that we don't say so-and-so told us, and secondly, that we do take action, but we may not always tell them what action it is we take because it might not be appropriate. But I think there's more work to be done in that dimension, and that's why I keep emphasizing partnerships. And sometimes people think that, hey, this is la la land, everything can't be through partnerships. Yeah, I understand that fully, but you can also achieve a ton that way, and you should give that an opportunity to work, and that would be partnerships with with colleagues, coworkers, and in the case of aviation, with the public.
Yeah, the pronunciation of our acronym is CSA, and we joke about CSA, see something, say something. So I thought about this. You're talking about, obviously we didn't make that up, but people have assigned that to us, so never way to remember our name. But so last but not least, the workforce. Our whole purpose, workforce development. It's we don't have enough cybersecurity people in general. So when you start talking about operating technology and cybersecurity excellence, it's even more of a problem. Is TSA involved in anything about helping sort of the entry, getting more people into cybersecurity? It's obviously all hands on deck. One department, and in my view, government also can't be totally responsible for this. But we've got we have a huge shortfall of people who know what to do.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting. You have a huge shortfall of people that know what to do, but probably not a huge shortfall of people who want to know what to do, right? Because a lot of folks look at anybody who has cyber expertise is probably employable without question for the foreseeable future,
right,
and can command a higher level of compensation because the skill sets are still fairly rare. I'll give you an example of something that we did. We went down to DEF CON, first time I've attended DEF CON ever. Went down to DEF CON. We also had a booth at DEF CON. And the thought was, hey, we really want to understand what hackers know. And kind of bring them into the fold, if you will, to help us out, to provide for overall cybersecurity, and really to point us in some directions of, hey, if I was to hack an airport system, these are the systems that I know are the most vulnerable, and let me show you how easy it is to get inside one of these systems. And so we went there. Jen Easterly went with me. The secretary went down there as well. We both had this message of, hey, we want to tap into your talent. You can contribute to our national security. And we also want to have you help us with recruiting. So we opened the booth at DEF CON. We got, I believe it was 1,600 resumes that came in after we left, because we said, hey, listen, you've got to be able to qualify for a federal security clearance. Here are the basic criteria for qualification. And if you're still interested, give us your resume and we'll process it. We got more return from that one event than we have from any other. So in a way, you just have to ask, right? You just have to say, hey, you all know a lot more about this than we do. Join the team, help us do it. The other thing that CISA's doing and we're doing is recognizing that people with cyber expertise might be interested in coming into the government to work, but might not want to work in the government for a career, right? Because hey, practical matter is, hey, I don't mind coming in and working 2-3 years at $200K a year, but I can make $400 or $500K in the private sector. I don't want to forego that opportunity in the long term either. And so we've established a system where people can come in, work in the government, kind of with the expectation on our side that they will leave after not a long time, not 5 years. They'll probably leave after 2 or 3, go back into the private sector. But one of the things that we say is that, hey, we actually encourage that, right? Because we're trying to build networks. We're trying to build continued advancement in expertise. When you're sitting on in a private sector company, you're going to have a different perspective than when you're sitting in the government. But the two should be, there's having more sharing of that perspective would be incredibly valuable. And the reverse is, if you're working in a private sector company, you come in and work inside a government agency, you have a good view of how it works. And when you're having a relationship with a government agency, what elements build a good relationship, right? And you also build a network. So, we think that it's very viable for cyber experts to come in, work in the federal government, a couple, 3 years, or longer if they want to, but let's say a couple, 3, go back out, work in the private sector, and then come back into the higher level, into the federal government. The other thing that we chose to do intentionally was we chose not to chase salaries because we knew we weren't going to ultimately be successful in that. And in a lot of ways, we wanted people to come into the government because they want to serve and they wanted to get a different perspective, not that they want to be financially rewarded way above what other government employees are being compensated at. So we do pay them a little bit more, but it's not anywhere near, in many cases, what they're going to get in the private sector. But I would think that, hey, somebody that has worked in, let's say you work in the rail sector, you spend a couple of years in TSA, you're going to be more competitive, I would suggest, in the rail sector because of that experience, because you have instant reach back. I mean, you know hundreds of people inside the agency that you can bounce things off of informally, and you kind of know the process. So you can inform your private sector company, hey, this is how they think, and this is the process that they're going to have to go through. So, don't be surprised when they come back and say this to you.
I love that. I'm approaching about 100 episodes of my podcast, interviewing people about their biographies, and you just talked about injecting something into someone's professional journey that opens new forks and new opportunities in the future. It doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to be a career. I also hear you saying things, and I think about my time in the military. There's a mission, and you can't find that in the civilian sector very often, if at all. There's a mission, something important, something bigger than me, something important for our society. So that seems to be an edge or a thing that can be offered by that sort of thing too, to offset obviously this salary differentials.
And the other part of it is that you have the opportunity to make national impact. Yeah. Right. And that's not an overstatement. I mean, the folks that wrote our cyber directives had national impact, and that's pretty inspiring. And humbling when you get to do that. Right. It's like, okay, I need to make sure that I got this right because of the impact it's potentially going to have.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time and for your many, many, many years of service to our country in various roles, wearing a lot of different hats, and now ultimately where you are with the TSA, keeping us safe. So thank you for all that.
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate it. Take care.